So we are from Group D. We are going to explain about the chapter 11 is about depreciation, impairments, and depreciations. So before we begin to the topic, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Radhiza Indan Andini with the lesson NPM 114. Now let's begin to the first material. It's about depreciation concept. So what is depreciation? Depreciation is a matter of cost allocation, not of valuation. Is the systematic allocation of an asset depreciable amounts to expense over its useful life. So there's three factors that we use in depreciation process. First one, we have depreciable base. In here, the total amount is to be written off over the asset's life. So for the formula is the original cost minus with residual value, and it will equal the depreciable base. Then for the next factor is service life, or we can also call it useful life. So in here, the period an asset is expected to be useful, which may differ from physical life. So there's two factors affect this. First is physical factor. Is it like wear and tear, decay, or casualties? And then the next factor is economic factor. This is like delinquency, supersession, and obsolescence. And then for the third factor that we can use in depreciation process is depreciation method. So it's a profession require method to be systematic and rational. Okay, next move to the next slide. I'm going to explain about the methods of depreciation. So there's a few methods that we can use. First, we have activity methods or we can use also call it units of use. So depreciation is a function of usage rather than a percentage of time. The formula that we can use in activity method is cost minus with residual value, and then the amount of this will be times with the hours or units of this year, and then we divide it with the total estimate hours of units. And then for the next method is we have Strickland method. So depreciation is a function of time. An equal amount is charged each year. So for the formula that we can use for Strickland method is cost minus with residual value and then divided with estimate service life. Okay, let's move again to the next method. This is the last method. It's called diminishing charge or accelerated methods. So this method results in higher expense in early years when the asset is most productive. There's two methods again that we can use in accelerated method. First one is sum of their digits. So in here, the sum of the years of useful is to find the decreasing counts of depreciation. Then for the next method is declining balance methods. So it applies a constant percentage to the declining book value. Next material will be explained by my friends.
My name is Rakuten Ramanan Nafjav and with the last 3 NPM 416. And in this part, I'm going to identify the other depreciation issues such as component depreciation, depreciation and partial period, depreciation and the replacement of property, plant and equipment, and the last one, revision of depreciation rates. First, component depreciation. Companies are required to use component depreciation when different parts of an item of property, plant, and equipment are significant to the total cost, and each significant part must be depreciated separately based on its own useful life. And for the depreciation and partial period, assets are rarely purchased exactly on the first day of the fiscal year, leading to partial periods. is determine the depreciation expense for the full year, determine the prorate expense between the two periods involved, and fractional year policies, nearest fraction of the year, half-year convention, and full-year policy. For the next is depreciation and replacement of property, plant and equipment, or PPE. Depreciation is a non-cash expense that reduces net income. It does not involve a current cash outflow. So, funds for assets replacement must come from revenues or other financing, not from the accounting entry of depreciation itself. And the last one is a revision of depreciation rates. Depreciation is based on estimates of useful life and residual value. Those estimates often need to be updated. And IFRS requires that company must review these estimates at least annually. If expectations differ from previous estimates, the changes accounted for as a charge in accounting estimate. And from the prospective application, revisions are handled in the current and future periods, so we don't go back and change previous years' financial statement. For this revision of depreciation rates, we have a new formula to find the new annual depreciation is remaining book value subtract by the new residual value and divided by the remaining estimated life. That's all from my part, and the next will be presented by my friend.
So good morning everyone, my name is Sagitla Firmansyah with last 3-digit MPM 186. I want to explain about the asset impairment management. So the core principle of impairment is we will look into the fundamental logic behind why and when a company must write down the value of its asset on its book. So the first question is, when is asset considered impaired? So this condition occurs when carrying amount, the book value of an asset is higher than its recoverable amount. If the book value is too high and no longer reflect the future economic benefits of the asset, we must write it down. This ensures that our balance sheet remains accurate and it's not overvalued. And second is valuation threshold. The recoverable amount represents the maximum value an entity can derive from an asset, ensuring that balance sheet figures remain representationally faithful. So how do we determine this recoverable amount? Accounting standard require us to compare two pillars of value. First is fair value less cost, which is how much money we would get if we sold the asset right now in the open market minus disposal cost. Second, value in use, which is the estimated present value of the total cash flow the asset will generate if we continue using it for our operation. So we calculate both, and then we choose the higher number. The highest figure become the recoverable amount. So next is the accounting entry. So on this fifth slide, we can see a flowchart that explains the logical process behind the impairment test. This process begins by taking the carrying amount or the recorded book value of our asset and we compare it to recoverable amount. So if we notice the box below it, this is recoverable amount. The standard require us to choose the higher of two options, which is fair value less cost to sell or value in use. If our book value turns out to be greater than this recoverable amount, then an impairment is confirmed. The company must immediately make the accounting entry shown on the left, debiting loss on impairment to recognize the loss on the income statement, and crediting accumulated depreciation to directly reduce the asset's value on the balance sheet. So next is reversal and adjustment. Economic conditions are always changing. So what if the market improve and the value of our previously impaired asset goes back up? So let's discuss the rules of reversal and adjustment in the next slide. First is the reversal ceiling. IFRS does allow us to reverse or recover impairment loss recorded in the past if the asset recoverable amount increased. But however, there is a safety ceiling, so the new carrying amount after the reversal cannot exceed the carrying amount that would have been recorded net of normal depreciation had no impairment loss been recognized in prior years. So we are not allowed to inflate the asset's value beyond its historical cost basis. So when should we check if an asset value can be reversed? The main indicator come from positive external factor, for example, favorable changes in the market, technology, or legal environment. Additionally, if market interest rates fall or discount rate also drop, which ultimately makes the asset's value in use calculation much higher. Next is cash generating units or CGO. So often we cannot calculate the independent cash inflow for a single asset. Imagine one specific cutting machine in the middle of a factory assembly line. It doesn't generate money on its own. So for cases like this, IFRS use the concept of cash generating units or CGU. We group this asset into smallest identifiable unit that can generate cash flow independently, and then we test for impairment at that group level. Next is asset for use versus disposal, the difference between them. So asset for use and disposal is important part that distinguish the company intent regarding asset. Is this asset going to continue to be used, or is it going to be sold or disposed? The treatment is very different. Asset held for use will continue to be depreciated, are evaluated based on the higher of recoverable amount rule, can be reversed up to the historical limit. Meanwhile, for asset held for disposal, depreciation is halted and they are valued at the lower of their carrying amount or fair value less cost to sell. Next is asset held for disposal. As a concluding explanation for this topic, so let's look into the flowchart. This chart shows that after conducting the impairment test, if the answer is yes, meaning an impairment has occurred, our accounting treatment will split into two branches depending on management's intent. First is the impairment loss is recorded. Second is depreciation will continue on based on the new written down cost basis. And third is reversal of the impairment loss is permitted in the future if economic condition improve. So conversely, let's look at the right branch. If the asset is an asset held for sale or disposal, it is measured at the lower of its carrying amount or fair value less cost to sell. And the most critical point here is that no more depreciation is taken while this asset is waiting to be sold. So by understanding this flowchart, we can ensure that the accounting treatment applied by the company is completely accurate and aligned with the intended future of the asset. So that's all the material that I present. The next material will be presented by my friend.
We get to the fourth part of the chapter. So this talking about the accounting procedures for depletion of mineral resources. So there is three types of depletion base. The first one is pre-exploratory expenditures. So these are costs that incur before the company has obtained the legal right to explore specific area. So before we're finding the minerals that we're looking for, this was count as pre-exploratory expenditures. And the next one is exploratory and evaluation cost, or E&E cost. This was acquisition of rights to explore topographical, geological, geochemical, and geophysical studies, exploratory drilling, sampling, in relation to evaluating the technical feasibility and commercial viability of extracting mineral resources. And the third one is development cost. This development cost is divided into two parts. The first one is tangible equipment cost, and intangible development cost. Tangible equipment cost is include all of the transportation of and other heavy equipment needed to extract the resource and get it ready for market. Intangible development cost, on the other hand, are such items as drilling costs, tunnel costs, shafts and wells, etc. Once the company establishes the depletion base, the next problem is determining how to allocate the cost of mineral resources to accounting periods. To compute depletion, the cost per unit then multiplied by the number of units extracted. For example, McLeod SA acquired the right to use 1,000 acres of land in South Africa to mine for silver. This lease cost is £50,000, and related exploration costs on property are £100,000. Intangible development costs incurred in the opening mine are £850,000. Total costs related to the mine before the first ounce silver is extracted are therefore £1 million. McLeod estimate that the mine will provide approximately 100,000 ounces of silver. So, the calculation formula is total cost minus residual value divided by total estimated units available is equal depletion cost per unit. For example, here we got £1 million divided by the estimated units available 100,000 is £10 per ounce. If McLeod extract 25,000 ounces in the first year, then the depletion for the year is 250,000 is 25,000 ounces times by 10 pounds. It records the depletion as follows. Inventory debited 250,000 and accumulated depletion is 250,000. McLeod debits inventory for the total depletion for the year and credits accumulated depletion to reduce carrying amount of the mineral resource. McLeod credits inventory when it sells the inventory. The amount of not sold remain in inventory and reported in the current asset section of statement of financial position. So, silver mine at cost is 1 million. Less accumulated depletion is 2,500, 250,000, which, and we still have credit of 750,000. In the income statement, the depletion cost related to the inventory sold is part of the cost of goods sold. And the next one is estimating the recoverable resources. Sometimes companies need to change the estimate of recoverable reserves. They do so either because they have new information or because more sophisticated production processes are available. This problem is the same as accounting for changes in estimates for the useful lives of plant and equipment. The procedure is to revise the depletion rate on a prospective basis. A company divides the remaining cost by the new estimate of the recoverable reserve. This approach must have merit because the required estimates are so uncertain. So, a company often owns as its only major asset a property from which it intends to extract mineral resources. If the company does not expect to purchase additional properties, it may gradually distribute to shareholders their capital investment by dividends, which are dividends greater than the amount of accumulated net income. To illustrate, at year end, Kalahan Mining had a retained earning balance of £1,650,000, accumulated depletion on mineral properties of $2,100,000, and share premium of $5,435,493. Callaghan board declared dividends of £3 per share on the 1 million shares of outstanding. So we got debited retained earning 1,650,000 and share premium ordinary of 1,350,000 with total cash of 3 million. Callaghan must inform shareholders that £3 dividends per share represent 1.65 pounds. This was 1,650,000 divided by 1 million per share return on investment, and 1.35 pound, which is 1,350,000 divided by 1 million shares per share liquidating dividend.
And now I wanna explain about recognizing revaluations. Up to this point, we have generally assumed that companies use the historical cost principle to value long-lived tangible assets after they buy them. However, companies actually have a choice. Under IFRS. They may value this asset at cost or at fair value. When a company elects to report its long-lived tangible asset at fair value subsequent to acquisition, they account for the change in fair value by adjusting the appropriate asset account and establishing an unrealized gain on the revalued asset. This unrealized gain is often referred to as the revaluation surplus. To illustrate how we revalue a non-depreciable asset like land, let's look at an example from the Siemens Group. Assume Siemens purchased land for €1 million on January 5, 2022 and elect to use revaluation accounting. By December 31st, 2022, an appraisal shows the land fair value has increased to $1,200,000. To record this change, we debit land for $200,000 and credit unrealized gain on revaluation land for $200,000. As a result, the land is reported on the statement of financial position at its fair value of €1,200,000. The unrealized gain increased other comprehensive income or OCI in the statement of comprehensive income. Furthermore, if this is the only revaluation adjustment made to date, the statement of financial position will report an accumulated other comprehensive income balance of €200,000 within the equity section. But if the asset is depreciable, look at the Lenovo Group, which purchases equipment for €500,000 on January 2nd, 2022. The equipment has a 5-year useful life, zero residual value, and is depreciated using the straight-line method. Lenovo also chooses the revaluation model. Before making a revaluation adjustment at the end of the year, Lenovo must first record its regular annual depreciation expense for 2022. That expense is €100,000, calculated as €500,000 divided by 5. The entry is a debit to depreciation expense and a credit to accumulated depreciation equipment for €100,000. After recording this, the carry amount of Lenovo equipment is €400,000, which is the originally €500,000 cost minus by €100,000 accumulated depreciation. And on the December 31st, 2022, Lenovo received an independent appraisal stating the fair value of the equipment is actually 460,000. To report the equipment at this fair value, Lenovo does three things. First, it reduces the accumulated depreciation equipment account to zero. Second, it reduces the equipment account by 40,000 so that it reflects the fair value of 460,000. Third, it records an unrealized gain on revaluation equipment for the 60,000 difference between the fair value 460,000 and the carrying amount 400,000. The exact journal entry to tie this all together is a debit accumulated depreciation for 100,000, a credit to equipment for 40,000, and a credit to unrealized gain on revaluation for 60,000. And now we move to core rules of revaluation. To summarize the general rule, a revaluation increase generally goes straight to equity via OCI. A revaluation decrease, however, is reported as an expense, an impairment loss, unless it offsets a previously recorded increase. If an increase offsets a previous decrease that went to expense, then that increase can be reported in the income statement. Under no circumstance can the accumulated OCI account related to revaluation have a negative balance. It's also vital to know that revaluation accounting is not an all or nothing proportion. A company can select to value only one class of assets like building and leave land or equipment at historical cost. However, if they select a class, they must revalue all assets within that entire class. This prevents cherry picking, which leads to a misleading mix of cost and fair value, and stop company from selectively maximizing their value. Finally, company must keep this value up to date. Assets experiencing rapid price change must be revalued annually. Most companies choose not to use this model because of the heavy and continuous appraisal costs and because can bypass net income to go directly to equity. And now we move to presentation of property, plant, equipment, and mineral. A company must disclose its valuation basis, which is usually historical cost, along with the pledge, liens, or commitment secured against the asset. Crucially, companies should never offset a liability secured by this asset against the assets themselves. The obligation must be reported in the liability section. For IFRS, company must also segregate operational assets from assets not currently employed as producing assets, such as idle facilities or land held as an investment. When it comes to reducing the asset value over time, there is a technical difference in presentation between depreciation and depletion. For depreciating assets, a company credits a valuation account called accumulated depreciation. This also financial statement used to clearly see both the original cost and the amount charged to expand in past year. For depleting mineral resources, some companies use an accumulated depletion account, but many choose to credit the mineral resource account directly. The rationale here is that mineral resources are physically consumed, making a direct reduction of the assets cost appropriate. Financial analysts evaluate a company's property, plant, and equipment based on activity and profitability. The primary ratio used to measure activity and efficiency is the asset turnover ratio. This ratio divides net sales by the average total asset for the period, telling us how many dollars or euro of sales are produced by each dollar invested in asset. Let's look at the Siemens Group data from their 2018 annual report. Siemens had net sales of 83,044 million. Their total assets were 138,915 million at the end of 2018 and 136,111 million at the end of 2017. By averaging those two asset figures and dividing the net sales by the average, we get an asset turnover of 0.6 times. This means Siemens generates 0.6 euro of sales per euro of assets. When evaluating this, keep in mind that turnover varies significantly by industry. A large utility might see a low ratio of 0.32, while a large grocery chain can reach a rapid 1.86 times. To get the full picture of asset performance, we must link efficiency to profitability. First, we calculate the profit margin on sales, also known as return on sales, by dividing net sales by net sales. And while profit margin itself doesn't answer how profitability a company uses its asset, we can find the return on assets or ROA by relating the profit margin to the asset turnover.